Hi everyone, great to be here with you and to be able to share with you and think about marriage today. And what I've got for you, I think, is a deeply contradictory talk. Hopefully not illogical or irrational or incoherent, but because marriage is a complicated thing, I do have some complicated and contradictory things to say about the future of marriage. And a lot of it, of course, depends on how you approach the question. And so we'll try and approach it, I guess, from a couple of different angles and get some perspective on it. But briefly, the answers I'm going to give are no, yes, no, and yes to that question of whether marriage has a future. We need to start off, first of all, thinking about a definition of marriage and try and understand what we're talking about. And what I'm talking about in the first place is what marriage has historically been understood to be. So a traditional or historical definition of marriage. I just want to kind of present that and get us to think through it because I actually think it's rare for people to have this understanding spelled out, and you kind of get that sense perhaps from the video, the vox pops that we saw, that people are kind of scratching around for a definition of marriage. So here's an attempt to try and say what marriage has traditionally been understood to be. So let me read a definition to you and then explain some of the elements of it. Marriage is a union of a man and a woman based on a permanent and exclusive commitment to each other. In marriage, two people consummate and build their union through sexual intercourse, which unites them as a couple and as a reproductive unit. Let me read it for you again. Marriage is the union of a man and a woman based on a permanent and exclusive commitment to each other. In marriage, two people consummate and build their union through sexual intercourse, which unites them as a couple and as a reproductive unit. So let me just expand on some of the elements of that definition and 5 factors here in that understanding of marriage. First of all, that marriage is a comprehensive union. That is, it's meant to be about a total sharing of lives together. It's unlike other kinds of union, unlike other kinds of unity. So, friendship, for example, is a kind of union. You have things in common with someone else, common interests, things that you enjoy together and so on, but it's not a comprehensive union. You're not planning on sharing everything that you are and everything that you have with your friend. Christian union is a union. We have a number of things in common in terms of the aims that we have on campus, but we're not planning to share our whole lives together. So this is a different kind of union. It's a comprehensive union, a union of lives and resources, of minds and wills, and of bodies as well. So two people do not share their bodies with each other. It's not a comprehensive union. If two people don't share their resources together, it's not a comprehensive union. Second of all, it's an exclusive union, and this is that is part of the commitment is to not just to be with that one person, but to forsake others. That it will just be a comprehensive union with this one person and not with anyone else. So it's an exclusive commitment. Thirdly, it's a permanent commitment. That is a lifelong commitment. That the ideal of marriage is that two people stay together as long as they are both living. So it's permanent. It's not absolutely permanent in the sense that it lasts forever, but permanent in the sense that it lasts until one of them dies. Fourthly, it's a sexually complementary relationship. So, first of all, it's a sexual relationship, and that's essential to what marriage is about. You might think of the idea of consummation, which has traditionally been the idea that marriage is not completed, and the wedding, if you like, is not completed until the couple have sexual intercourse. So, and that has continued to be the kind of legal definition, that if that didn't occur, then in fact the marriage hasn't taken place. But it's not just that it's a sexual relationship, but that there is that it is complementary, fully complementary. What I mean by this is that it's not just that certain sexual activities take place, but specifically that sexual intercourse takes place. That is, that two people are united together in a fully complementary way, the way that their bodies are designed in accord with the kind of natural purpose of our bodies. So it's the full and complete bodily union of two people. And connected to that is the fifth thing, and that is that it's procreative in intention. That the idea of marriage is that it's meant to lead, in terms of its intention, it's meant to lead to the conception and the birth of children. And so a sexually complementary relationship will hopefully in time, by intention, lead to children being conceived and born. That means that marriage is both companionate and procreative. That is, it's about two people being companions together in life, but it's also about them seeking to bring other lives into the world. And the sexual aspect of marriage is, as we heard last week, both unitive and generative, both unitive and procreative, meant to unite and bind two people together, but also lead to children being conceived. So those are the kind of elements that I think that we'd expect to see in a traditional understanding of marriage. Under this understanding, marriage is a common or a natural institution. That is, it's a product of our nature as human beings. In some sense, it's demanded by what we are. It's not specifically religious in nature. So Christians, for example, don't understand marriage to be a Christian institution, but rather something that is wider than any particular religion. Something that belongs to all of humanity, and that is something that is, in essence, common across all religious and cultural lines. It's a transcultural phenomenon. And so we want to see marriage under this kind of definition as something that's common or natural. And beyond that, it's something that's been understood to be good in itself. So that this is an institution which has come into being for the good of human beings and human society. And the general understanding has been that this institution is helpful for people and helpful for the society. And I think contemporary social research tends to back that up. So let me give you some examples of ways in which marriage is good in itself. First of all, it's good for the couple involved, and this is true in a number of ways. Married people have longer life expectancy than those who are unmarried. Married couples report higher levels of emotional satisfaction in their sexual relationship. Married people are more productive and have higher incomes. There are some specific benefits for men and for women in marriage. So married men earn 10 to 40% more than unmarried men. Married men are physically fitter and less prone to illness and disability. Married men are less likely to have alcohol and drug addictions, to commit crimes, or to be abusive. Married women have lower rates of depression and a significantly lower risk of suicide. Married women are much less likely to be victims of domestic abuse. American figures, only 5% of American women report abuse compared to 14% of those in other cohabiting relationships. Marriage is also good for children. So if you compare children who are raised under the same roof as their biological parents who are married, the outcomes in their lives tend to be significantly better. So for example, in terms of educational achievement, literacy rates, graduation rates from school. In terms of their emotional health, the rates of anxiety, depression, substance abuse and suicide. In terms of their family and sexual development, they have a stronger sense of identity. The onset of puberty is generally later. They have lower rates of teen pregnancy and lower rates of sexual abuse. And in terms of their growth to adulthood, lower rates of aggression, lower incidence of ADD, lower incidence of delinquency, and lower incidence of incarceration. So I don't think actually this is controversial, though in some ways it's, I think, widely ignored that marriage, traditional marriage in this sense, has been understood as something good in itself, and I think that's borne out by This is why the state has an interest in marriage, I think. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but for some reason the state in most nations takes an active interest in marriage and regulates marriage and has laws to regulate marriage in various ways. Why would that be? Why would the state want to get involved in people's relationships, especially if they were private relationships in this way? Why would the state want to do that? Is it just that the state loves to interfere in people's lives in any way possible? Well, that's quite possible, I guess, but a more generous reading would be, no, the state recognises the need to provide for the well-being of its citizens, and in view of the good of marriage for those involved and for the children that are born from it, it's in the interest of the state to regulate and to foster and to protect marriage. And so that's why I think we have a situation where marriage is a legal arrangement in Australia and in many other countries, and where the state provides a definition of what marriage is for those kinds of reasons. So, this, as I said, this is a natural institution, if you like, something that's common across many cultures and religions, and as Christians, as a Christian, I would say, it's also an institution that reflects a biblical ideal. So Christians looking at this institution recognise something there that is in effect expressing something that they find taught in the Bible as well. So this is broadly based on Genesis 1 and 2, Psalms 127 and 128, and you can read those sections of the Bible to see that, and taught and then reaffirmed by Jesus himself in Matthew chapter 19. So let me read to you what Jesus had to say when he was asked about marriage from Matthew 19. And maybe you can hear the connections here between what Jesus says and the kind of traditional definition of marriage that I've talked about. Jesus said, have you not read that the one who made them at the beginning, and here Jesus quotes from Genesis 1 and 2, have you not read that the one who made them at the beginning, quote, made them male and female, unquote, and said, quote, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, unquote. And here's Jesus' comment on all of that. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let no one separate. You have there quite a number of the elements of the traditional understanding of marriage that I mentioned before. The idea of one flesh being a way of talking about marriage and a way of talking about sex kind of sums that up. A kind of organic union of two people together in a relationship in that way. So Christians have generally therefore been in favour of that traditional understanding of marriage. However, kind of imperfectly it's expressed in a particular society or culture, Christians have been positive about that and see it as reflecting God's will for human life. Okay, well, what about this question of does marriage have a future? And in raising that question, I'm really asking, does that traditional understanding of marriage have a future? Well, one way of answering that is to say no, that marriage is dying as an institution, that it's an institution in crisis at the moment. Part of this, of course, is a lack of participation in marriage. The crude marriage rate in Australia, that is the rate of marriage as a proportion of the total population, has been in decline in Australia since 1970. So that's a long period of decline in marriage. In the last 20 years, in 1989 the crude marriage rate was 7 people per 100, and in 2009 it had fallen to 5.5. So there's still in the last 20 years some significant decrease in the proportion of people getting married, not in the number of people. The marriage is more popular than ever in terms of raw numbers in Australia, but in terms of proportion, that's fallen. And similar falls have been recorded in the United States, in the United Kingdom, and so on. So across the English-speaking Western world, marriage has been in a long-term decline. For example, in the United States, the marriage rate fell 50% from 1970 to 2004. In that time, we've also had the Marriage Act in Australia, which introduced no-fault divorce, and so it became very easy for people to walk out of marriages if they no longer wanted to be part of one, and lots of people have taken up that option. 1/3 of children born in Australia are now born outside of a marriage relationship. 25% of households in Australia are now one-person households, so there's been a great increase in the number of people living on their own. And of course, also people are marrying later. And as we heard on the video, there's this idea that marriage is probably a good idea. Once you've really enjoyed your life, once the good bit of your life is over, then you might settle for marriage after that. And of course, marriage is seen as not necessary by many people. Though interestingly, on the Can of Worms survey, you might know that Channel 10 television show, 78% of people said that marriage was necessary. I think maybe some Christians got on the website and just kept clicking something like that. But the common question is, well, how can a piece of paper make a difference? Or how can wearing a ring make a difference? So marriage has suffered by lack of participation, but also now is under pressure from the idea of redefining marriage, redefinition. And so potentially there is the possibility of a redefinition of marriage. In some ways, the no-fault divorce thing already started that it was already clear that marriage was, the permanence of marriage was itself under threat. And then the idea of open marriage, which was big in the 70s and 80s, also undermined the traditional definition of marriage by suggesting that it didn't have to be exclusive. But now the pressure for same-sex marriages is in fact a pressure to redefine what marriage is about. So in order to have a marriage between two men or two women, you would need to change that traditional definition and leave out the last couple of elements of it that I described to you. That it could not be a fully comprehensive, a fully complementary sexual union, and it couldn't be with the intention of children being born out of the union. So those elements of traditional marriage would have to disappear in order for such a thing to be recognised by the state. So there is that pressure there, and in the society, and it seems to me quite likely that the definition of marriage will be changed. Not inevitable, but fairly likely. Behind that, there is then the pressure from various other groups and people to broaden the definition of marriage even further. So you may know that following the recognition of same-sex marriages in some states, in the United States and in Canada, others have said, well, why can't we also have the same right to marry? So people who are in polyamorous relationships, where there's more than two people involved, have said, well, if the definition of marriage is flexible, then why can't we be married? You're discriminating against us by not allowing us also to be married. And of course, once the definition of marriage is up for grabs, and any two people or group of people can claim to be married in some sense, then it will be hard to deny them their right to get married. Why shouldn't two brothers, a brother and sister get married? Why shouldn't people get married in various kinds of arrangements? We even have the avant-garde marriage of people to objects. And you may have heard about the woman who's married to the Berlin Wall, has been married to the Berlin Wall for 29 years, and also the woman who's married to the Eiffel Tower. I don't know if you could kind of get in on that, but there is obviously that's stretching the definition of marriage to a huge degree to kind of think in those terms. The thing that I think about this, quite apart from issues of what we think is right and wrong in relationships, is that if marriage can mean whatever we want it to mean, if marriage is capable of redefinition, if it's malleable to the extent that it can mean whatever we want it to mean, then marriage actually loses its meaning as a concept. that if anything can be marriage, then actually marriage doesn't mean anything at all. It becomes an entirely private concern as to what you regard as a marriage. And so I think tends to lose its strength and specific meaning. Those things suggest that marriage is an institution in crisis, that it's dying as an institution. On the other hand, I think that we'd probably be unwise to rush to the conclusion that therefore marriage is not going to last. And a few reasons for thinking that way. First of all, marriage in Australia has had a history of ups and downs, and you can look at the statistics of that since they've been kept since about Federation in Australia, and you'll see that there are a number of peaks and a number of troughs in the story of marriage, that marriage has had its ups and downs before. And I think that that's also reflected more broadly, though we don't have the statistics specifically in the history of marriage around the world, that there have been times when marriage as an institution has been strong and times when it's been weak. Interestingly, both the marriage rates and divorce rates have levelled out in Australia in the last 4 or 5 years. That the decline has perhaps reached an end, and now things are kind of running on a level. People aren't getting divorced at a higher rate than before. People aren't getting married at a higher or lower rate than before. It seems to have plateaued out. Second example is of the phenomenon of polygamy and concubinage, and this has been that phenomenon in history where people have, especially men, have taken more than one wife, or also where they've had women who belong to them, who they're not married to but have a sexual relationship with. And I just point this out because this has been an extremely widespread phenomenon in the world, in different places, different times. It's clearly a subversion of the ideal of marriage in its traditional form, but in many ways an expression of kind of men turning marriage into what they want it to be at the expense of women. But even where this institution, even when this phenomenon has been quite widespread and deeply ingrained, it hasn't lasted as an arrangement that, in a way, traditional marriages continue to assert itself and continue to be a strong way of understanding that relationship, and has actually been able to see off the challenge of polygamy and concubinage in various ways. That is, that those alternate arrangements, those alternate views of marriage haven't actually lasted in the same way that traditional marriage has. And so you see there a kind of the way in which traditional marriage is so deeply ingrained that it is actually in various ways able to resist challenges to it. And so it has been in history when people have tried to set up systems of very easy divorce, making it easy for men to discard their wives, attempts to create marriage as a temporary institution for a set number of years have failed, and we've seen in various ways marriage go through times of renewal in the world, so that it's been neglected and then come back into favour again. So I think it's a resilient and a robust institution, and for those who are kind of against traditional marriage, actually a difficult institution to kill off. Part of the reason is because traditional marriage is demographically resilient. And I don't know if you've kind of thought about this, but this is one of the strange things about it, is that people who are in favour of traditional marriage tend to have more children than those who are not. People who are married tend to have more children than those who are unmarried. And so, in some ways, the demographic resistance to the loss of traditional marriage is quite strong. People have lots of kids, they bring their children up to believe in traditional marriage, and those children have lots of kids, and so on. Now, obviously, some people change their minds, think differently about these things, but there is an inbuilt kind of resistance to that kind of thing. Okay. So I think in some ways we might say marriage is an institution in crisis, but on the other hand, that marriage is tough enough to put up with the crisis. But the second way I wanted to think about it with you is just to think about marriage in itself, and want to say that in regard to marriage having a future, that marriage is doomed. Marriage is doomed, and it's doomed by definition. That is, when people get married in traditional marriage, they marry until they are parted by death. And what that means is that it's our mortality that means that marriage is always under threat. Marriage is always an institution in trouble, that marriage is always in danger. That all marriages end, and all marriages end badly. I like to say this at weddings. Impress the parents of the bride and groom. But it is nevertheless true that all marriages end badly. They either end in divorce or in death, and it's important from the outset to realise that, to not live under any illusions, that marriage is eternal, that marriage lasts forever, and that you're forming a relationship that lasts forever. That's not actually what marriage is about. And so marriage is never truly stable. Marriage is an institution that is always in crisis, and it has an inbuilt crisis. The crisis is inherent to what marriage is for human beings. Always under threat, never truly stable. And marriage, what that means in effect is that marriage as an institution is always, only 80 years away from oblivion. But marriage as an experience is always one of knowing that this is merely temporary, that this is a temporary arrangement in our lives, and that the clock is ticking on. So I've been married, I've figured it out now, I've been married 18 years, going on 19, and it seems to me that has gone very quickly, and I already feel that the time is running out. So my wife Beck's already had a couple of life-threatening things. She had a melanoma, she had complications in one of her pregnancies. I very much feel like our mortality is a constant threat to our marriage, and there's a need to just really enjoy every moment, because I can see that this is not an eternal thing. This is not something that will last forever. And so there is that sense in which marriage is always a doomed thing. But there is some good news about that, and that is that there is a marriage that will be a perfect marriage that will last forever. And this is the unusual biblical perspective, the unusual perspective that the Bible brings to this, and that Christians have about marriage. That human marriages are actually, in some sense, not the real thing. That they are a sign that points to something else. Let me read to you from the book of Revelation. And in this passage, you may know that the book of Revelation is a series of visions given to one of Jesus' followers called John. And in the visions, he gets to see something of the true spiritual meaning of things that are going on in the world. And also, he's given the visions of the future about what God's future is. What's the final state of things going to be? Where are things headed? And this is one of his visions from Revelation 19. Let me read it to you. Then I heard what seemed to be the voice of a great multitude, like the sound of many waters, and like the sound of mighty thunder peals, crying out, Hallelujah! For the Lord our God, the Almighty, reigns. Let us rejoice and exult and give him the glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. To her it has been granted to be clothed with fine linen, bright and pure. For the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. And the angel said to me, Write this, Blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And he said to me, These are true words of God. It's a vision of a marriage. The groom here is called the Lamb. That's a way of talking about Jesus in his role as sacrifice on our behalf. It's a picture of the bride coming to this groom and being married, and there being a great celebration, a great marriage supper, a great celebration of this wedding. This kind of brings to an end a story that runs through the Bible. It's the story of how can God and human beings be together. And in some ways it's the kind of great romance or the great soap opera of the Bible. It's a story of the rocky romance between God and human beings. Human beings continually kind of running away from God, not wanting to be with God, and God pursuing human beings and pursuing relationship with us. The prophet Hosea pictures God as promising to come and woo us, to come and seek us out and find us and win us over, so that we'll belong to Him. But the whole question is, well, how is God going to do that? How is God going to bring us into a relationship with Him? And the answer is that God's going to do that through Jesus, His Son. That Jesus is God, come to find us, come to make us His own, come to win us and woo us. And so Jesus called Himself the bridegroom. He referred to Himself as the bridegroom, and He is the one who comes to gather people to be with God forever. And so that's where this picture of the ultimate wedding feast comes from. What happens when Jesus gathers God's people together to be with God forever. That's the great celebration, that's the great wedding. That's when the massive party will be, to celebrate God and His people forever. And what that means is we understand that marriage, whatever good it is in itself, and there is lots of good things about it in itself, is also a symbol. It's a symbol of God's eternal future. Marriage is meant to point us towards something greater than itself. Marriage in itself is, human marriages are doomed, human marriages are temporary, human marriages are imperfect, but they point us towards a great marriage when God and His people would be together forever. What that means is that marriage does have a great future, has a better future than our nations, than our corporations, than our institutions, a better future than the university itself. It's got a great future. It's a good thing now, but it's also something that points to a great future. What that means is that our marriages now can be the imperfect and temporary things that they are. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to last forever. They don't have to fulfill every desire of our heart, because they actually point towards something that will do those things. What that means is that not everyone needs to be married. That singleness is opened up as a real option for human beings, because the most important thing is not about whether you get married or not. The most important thing is about whether you're part of that great marriage. Well, I might stop there and get a drink, and if you'd like to ask any questions, then you can do that. We've just got a couple of minutes for questions.
Yeah, as far as you were saying about polygamy, there's a lot of like biblical characters in you, like King David, who had multiple wives.
Yes.
And why is there no? Never in there do you see God saying to them, you shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
Like David, for example, had multiple wives,
Yeah.
and nothing was said about it. But as soon as he went off with Bathsheba,
Yeah.
along came Prophet Nathan and said, no, you shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah. What about polygamy in the Bible, I guess is the...
That's a question, yeah.
Yes, great question. Well, I think that the idea is that it's clearly not in accord with the ideal that's set out at the beginning. And the story itself shows how stupid it is. That the people involved in this, it never works out. It never comes to anything good. And so the possibility is just subverted by the story. But you're right that it's in some ways it's tolerated. Polygamy is tolerated for a while, for a period in the Bible. Yeah, that's right. But not endorsed.